What's up guys, Alan Brock here, and I'm sweating bullets because it's about 1,000,000% humidity here in East Tennessee today. But I wanted to go ahead and get this video done. We're going to talk a little bit about graduated neutral density filters. And you don't see these used too much anymore because new cameras like the Sony A7R2, I think it's called, have about 57 stops of dynamic range. That combined with the updates that Adobe Camera RAW has made with the ability to pull out the highlights has really made a big difference in how people shoot, and has really kind of neglected or kind of reduced the need for these graduated neutral density filters. But if you're still shooting film, particularly if you're still shooting slide film, these are an indispensable tool. Reason being is Velvia has about 5 stops of dynamic range. So there's no way that you're going to be able to get the sky, which is bright, and your foreground, which is dark, balanced. So the way these graduated neutral density filters work, you've got different strengths of darkness on the top of the filter, and it's clear on the bottom. The way you use it is you slide the filter down over the lens. The dark part covers up the sky, and the clear part at the bottom leaves your foreground completely unaffected by the exposure. So I'm going to go over a little bit about how I use these both. I'll go over for digital cameras in case people are still using them digitally, but especially for large format here, it's a bit tricky to use a graduated filter with a large format camera because quite honestly, it's hard to see the transition line. So if you're trying to get an accurate transition to pull that line right over the edge of the horizon, it's very difficult to see where it transitions from light to dark. So I'm going to show you how I use my super high-tech secret weapon, an index card. And the way I use that index card is under the dark cloth. Let me slide this out. I will slide my index card in my Coke and P filter, and I will match up the edge of the index card to the horizon, and then I will slide my graduated filter over the top of that, pull the transition line to where the edge of the index card is, and that gives me a really accurate location of the horizon line. Now these are Stingray graduated neutral density filters because I like to spend tons of money on plastic rectangles, but they really are high quality. They don't have any color cast when you're using them individually. You can stack them, you'll start to get a little bit of magenta and red when you start to stack them, but really a high quality graduated filter. So let's step under the dark cloth here and I'll show you how I use these. Okay, so we're gonna go under the dark cloth here, and we've got this landscape set up in front of us, and for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to pretend that those trees are a solid horizon, which I've placed at the center of my composition because that's how I roll as a landscape photographer. Now I've got my index card placed in one of the slots of my Coke and P filter, and it's stopped down to where I want to shoot. And I'm just going to lower that until it's right at the horizon there. Okay, so once I've got that done, I'm going to place my graduated neutral density filter in a slot in front of the index card, and I'm going to pull it down to where the transition is just beneath the edge of the index card. That way I've ensured that no bright spots are above my horizon. So one thing that's very important, whether you're shooting large format or just digital 35mm, is to always preview your scene using the aperture that you're going to use for your final exposure, either by using the depth of field preview button on digital cameras or just stopping down on large format cameras. And the reason for that is, as you change apertures, your transition line can be lowered dramatically. For instance, right here, same scene, all I'm going to do here, right now I've got it opened up to about f8. All I'm going to do is stop down. I'm not actually moving the index card at all, but you can see how much that line is moving down. So shooting or previewing it at the final aperture you're going to use for your image is very important for getting an exact transition from light to dark on your graduated neutral density filter. Okay, so that was really miserable. It was about 90 degrees and about 80% humidity, and I was by an old creek, so I was getting eaten alive by bugs. I really wanted to do this all outside, do a demonstration on a digital camera, but I was miserable and couldn't even think about what I was saying. So I brought it back inside. I've got a little bit of air conditioning going, so we'll finish it up in here. So let's talk a bit about the graduated filters themselves. You're going to want to spend a little bit of money on these. If you go cheap, you're going to start to get some color casts in the darkened areas. As I mentioned before, I use Stingray, and those are fairly expensive, but they're also fairly neutral. I've not noticed any color casts in them. If you start to stack them, you'll get a little bit of red and magenta, but just using a single filter, you're never going to notice a color cast. I would also trust B&W. Tiffin makes good filters. I have used relatively cheap filters before and just been miserable correcting the color casts. So the filters I use, again, they're Stingray filters. They come in different strengths. You can get a 1-stop, 2-stop, 3-stop. I've even seen 4-stop filters. What that refers to is the dark area of the filter. The stop refers to how many stops of light that's going to hold back. So I use 2- and 3-stop graduated filters. I've not really found a use for a 1-stop filter. That's really too minimal to make a difference. In addition to differences in stops, you can also get a hard edge versus a soft edge filter. What that refers to is the transition line between the dark and the clear areas. In a hard edge filter, that's a relatively just straight line. It almost immediately goes from clear to the dark part. That's going to be useful for really flat horizons like in an ocean or maybe the rim of the Grand Canyon if you're overlooking that. The soft transition graduated filter is going to be a much more feathered transition. You're not really going to be able to see the line going from the clear to the dark area. What that's going to be used for is when there isn't really a regular horizon. If you're shooting in the Grand Tetons or something that obstructs the horizon, keeps it from being completely level. Honestly, I don't really use a soft filter that much. I'll get into why in just a second, but if you're using a digital camera and you have an uneven horizon, a jagged horizon, I would simply just bracket. Just expose one for the foreground, one for the sky, blend them manually, or with today's cameras and Adobe Camera RAW, you can bring back so many details in both the shadows and the highlights. It's really not an issue. So there's a few other things that are going to affect that transition line. The wider angle your lens, the more sharp the transition line is going to be. If you're using a filter holder such as the Koken filter holder, or I think Lee makes a filter holder that has multiple slots in it, the further away, if this is your lens, the further out from the lens the further you go, the more hard that line is going to be. Another thing that's going to affect it is when you stop down, the smaller your aperture, the more distinct that line is going to be. Now, I found that using large format, even if you use a hard edge filter with a very wide angle lens, that transition is going to be very, very tough to notice in the final image. I was taking a shot in Zion of the Towers of the Virgin, and there's really no more, there's no horizon line there. It's all jagged peaks. Put a 2-stop hard edge filter on it, you can't tell where the transition is. So really, the larger your sensor size, the more feathered that transition is going to be. So you really don't have to worry about it. Even with a moderately wide lens, my 90mm lens in large format, stop it down to f/45, I don't notice the transition line. That's about a 28mm equivalent on a 35mm lens. So relatively wide, you can't see where the transition line is going to be. So if you do decide to use these filters with your digital camera, as you are placing the transition line, you're going to want to use your camera's depth of field preview button, because even if you're viewing your image, whether you're viewing it through the viewfinder or in live view, your camera's lens is always wide open. Even if you have it set, say at f11, that camera, your lens doesn't actually stop the aperture down until you hit that shutter button to take your image, or you hit the depth of field preview button. And what that does, stops your camera's lens down. That's going to give you the true position of your transition line. It's going to make it much more accurate when you compose your images. Alright, so we'll send it back to me, burning up out in the field. Hope you guys found this useful, and we'll see you next time. Alright guys, so that's it. Thanks for watching. Hope this gave you some tips for how to find the transition line for your graduated neutral density filters a little bit easier. It is burning up here. I am just miserably hot. So thanks for watching. We'll see you later.